Hi there. Welcome to The Preventable, the podcast giving you a seat at the table with conversations about the intersection of alcohol, drugs, and mental health in everyday lives. Take a seat and join us.
Welcome to The Preventable. We're here today with a mini episode for In the Weeds. In the Weeds is a campaign that Prevent+Ed launched last May of 2024, to really have honest conversations about cannabis in today's world. We know things are always changing as far as legalization statuses, products available, what people think they know or what they might know about cannabis or how they're using cannabis. So we launched this campaign to help give people information. So there's an In the Weeds site that offers talking kits for adults to talk to young people, or for people to talk to their friends or peers about cannabis, and also for us to just continue to have conversations about all of the nuance of this topic, because we know that it is much more complicated than just a one page or a website might address. So we'll be talking to Madeline and Sam today about their experiences and their lives as college students, and what they think about substance use and cannabis and all of the things that combine there. I want to make sure and give a big thanks to Hubbard Radio for giving us the space today to record our podcast and being such a great partner as we continue in season 5 of The Preventable. So, Madeline and Sam, hi, welcome to The Preventable. How are you all doing today?
Hello, we're good.
Yeah, doing well. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. So you both are students at Washington University, is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes.
All right. And tell me where you came from before you were students at WashU.
I can start. So, yeah, I'm a graduate student at WashU for social work and public health. And before that, I was at the University of Texas at Austin for undergrad. And I graduated from there in 2023.
Excellent. Thank you.
And we're in the same program, so social work, public health. But before coming to WashU, I did undergrad at Gonzaga University, which is up in Washington State.
Yeah.
And then after I graduated, I taught 8th grade science for 2 years in Denver. So I can speak a little about that too.
Yeah, middle school.
My students got a little involved in the weeds. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you both being here and taking this time. I know that, this isn't probably something, or maybe it is something. I guess that's the question. When we think about substance use and, cannabis or marijuana specifically, is this something that you all sit around and talk to your friends about, or, is common conversation or things happening, on WashU, at WashU? And I don't mean like at WashU as an institution, but just, as with your peers. What is the conversation happening around cannabis?
Yeah, I would say there's definitely conversation about it, and it's more casual, where some of our peers in our friend group and on campus talk fondly of weed and use it recreationally. I would say that's the majority of the conversations I hear are like more positive, casual, like pastime activity.
Yeah, I would agree. I've also had a lot of peers who've had terrible experiences and talk about that a lot, and just like the anxiety that they've experienced from using, and also other people like trying to walk them through the experience of using weed, but being like, no, I've tried it before, it's not for me, I do not like it. And so I think people have very different experiences on like a wide spectrum of what their experience has been like and how they feel towards using it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. When I think about that, people having positive experiences and it being, maybe part of their life and they're talking about it, and then, other people that hasn't been how they've seen it happen. Mm-hmm. Is there ever any like tension in that conversation, or are people pretty open to hearing other people's experiences?
I would say our circle is a special example of social work students who are very good listeners and very understanding and empathetic. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if we're the best sample for that, but our conversations are usually really supportive, where I'm thinking of, there's a couple girls in our group who enjoy it more than others, and I remember we had a conversation like the beginning of our program about it, because one of the girls wanted to bring some to like a party, and the rest of us were like, a couple of us were like, well, like it really spikes my anxiety, like for me personally, and like another girl, and the other girl was super responsive and like respectful, and then decided not to bring it because she wanted us to be comfortable and like didn't want to add any pressure. But I could see maybe in a non-social work circle where it would be more of a pressuring environment, but I would say our group's pretty supportive about it.
Yeah, I think like Sam was saying, all of our friends are very much like that. But I know in undergrad, I have one friend who specifically who I have in mind who in high school, she tried it, had a terrible experience, has used it other times and just it's never gone well for her. And some of our other friends were heavy users, used it very frequently, and were trying to be like, well, have you tried this version? Have you tried this? Have you tried an edible or in different things? And she's like, yes. I don't like it, but was still like surrounded by that experience. And so, yeah, I think it definitely depends on who is in the group and
kind of what that environment and that conversation might look like.
Yeah.
Fascinating, yeah. So, do you think that conversations have changed around it? Like, as you think back to maybe even when you were an undergraduate or even before that, have you seen shifts in conversation around cannabis among your peers, I guess we'll call them, or people around you, or have things kind of just always been this way as far as you've seen in your life?
What I've noticed more is I have like 3 different, like one's a couple, and then 2 are like independent girls that I'm friends with, and they're talking about wanting to decrease. They're talking about, it's like getting in the way of other parts of my life, or like this one couple that I know, like they smoke almost every day together, and they're trying to do a cleanse and like trying to cut back. And so these 3 different instances in like my close circle right now are currently speaking more about like, okay, how do I decrease? Because they're recognizing like maybe this is taking away from other parts of my life or preventing me from doing different things, so the talk of like, how am I allocating my time, and do I want to be dedicating this much time to weed is a new thing I've heard from people.
Okay, so I mean, if that might be, again, seeing some ways that it's getting in the way of other things, or, maybe just comes with time and age that life changes, right? So there's more things to focus on. That's really interesting. So how are they doing? Are they able to navigate that, or are they hitting some bumps, or what do you think?
I know my one friend, she's 2 years post-grad, and she used to smoke every day in college and would have to, and sometimes would multiple times during the day, and she reflects back on that and can't imagine doing that now, and is really grateful that she does it less. So her and her boyfriend do it like maybe once or twice a week, I think. I think it's pretty like rare now, but she talks about like the clarity she feels now, and the difference of her like quickness of like thinking and conversation and discussion like is very different for her. And her partner, he's in higher education right now, and an interesting thing from him is like he plans when they smoke based on assignments that he has or like projects that he has, because he said this to me, he's like, I know after I smoke I have a couple days where my brain's in a fog, and he's like, so I time when I smoke so that I don't affect my projects. And it's like higher education, so like very important deadlines, and it's just an interesting planning.
Hey, that's great self-reflection, and a lot of planning that has to go into that, So when we think about it, as something that somebody might do for fun or to relax, I mean, that's not saying, I have an extra couple hours today, I'm going to go on a hike, or I'm going to go, shopping, or do something else you might enjoy. You really have to, sounds like for him, he has to schedule that out.
For sure, yeah. That's like planning a week in advance of, okay, how many days can I afford having some brain fog?
Yeah.
I was going to say, like, not reflecting necessarily on conversations that are happening right now, but compared to conversations in, like, middle school and high school, and kind of what you were saying, I feel like people now are just way more informed. Maybe that just comes with age and like the career path that we're taking, and just like the increased legalization, and maybe more people are just informed. But I know in high school I knew absolutely nothing about cannabis, and I don't think really anybody did, and I think just in school I was never really taught about like weed. My family didn't really know anything about it. I know my parents were like, we've never smoked and you should never smoke either.
And that was it. Yeah.
And so it was just this like sense of fear. I was like, oh my God, I don't know what would happen if I ever did or what any of it means. And so, yeah, I think now we're able, probably just being older and having more life experience, but able to engage in more like meaningful conversations around it.
Yeah. So, and you know, if this isn't a question that you know, that's okay. But where do you think people get their information now? Do you think it's just out there more, or do you think there's some like trusted sources of information that people might go to learn more about cannabis?
So this is a little bit tangent to this, but answers it as well. Mm-hmm. Last week I was listening to an NPR Up First podcast, and they were talking about how 50% of our states it's legal now, but only like 15% of people use it, or some percentage. But they were talking about the problem now is, since it's not federally legal, you have these different regulations by state, and there's not a standardized way that it's regulated. So they referenced some studies in their podcast, but they were showing that we don't have ways of regulating pesticide amounts in weed or mold percentages in weed, and that there's exposures to both of these things that users aren't aware of. And then based on your state and based on your store, there's different regulations on how clean does your weed need to be. So depending on where you get your weed and what your state regulations, you could be smoking pesticides and mold, which is not good for your health.
Well, absolutely not. And I think that's been the ongoing challenge as we've kind of seen this change in legalization status across the country, is there's not really a uniform way. And there's still so much unknown about the plant that it all comes from, you know, the cannabis plant and, you know, the combination and the makeup of the plant, and then how states regulate. I mean, there's even been studies that show, you know, there's different intensity or types of cannabis, right? So different THC levels or CBD levels are usually the most common. And studies have shown that even samples of those plants or those products that might be in a dispensary that's labeled having so much percentage of CBD or so much percentage of THC, so people might have, you know, a different reaction to that, and people might be seeking one product or another, that sometimes those labels aren't even always accurate. So without having that consistency and that really clear idea of how to know what's in the product, I think that can be a little questioning for people, or, you know, really make people even uneasy still about what they're doing, even if it is maybe legal for that state or that area. Absolutely.
And just quickly answer your initial question, I don't think people know that. And I think where consumers like our age or our peer groups get their information is social media. Like, is TikTok, is Instagram, and I think that's the furthest people go. I think if a new individual is interested in weed, they're going to go to TikTok and say, what kind of weed should I try if I want this effect?
Yeah, or go to a dispensary and just talk to the person working there.
And they're going to sell you a product because they need profit.
Right, and then they'll just base if they like it or not on...
Yeah, they're going to help you find something that you like, but they're maybe not going to walk you through all of the risks.
Yeah, that is true. And that is something that we try to do a lot at Prevent+Ed, is that education. And it's not saying, you know, don't ever do this, but really making sure that young people as young as, you know, teenagers and middle school students and all through adults are just educated about the product and what people are putting in their bodies.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think in Missouri, there are dispensaries where I guess people can go and ask those questions, and people who probably are way more knowledgeable about these products, or hopefully are way more knowledgeable. But in Texas, like where I went to undergrad, that was not the case. Like it wasn't legalized, so there was no place to go ask questions. Yeah. And my peers were just going to their friends and asking what about their experience, what they used. And so you're obviously getting very biased information as well, because, oh, you had a great experience with this, but my other friend probably was not going to have a great experience. And so, yeah, I think social media or just other people who are using it maybe that experience is unique to them.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I mean, and I think that's the other, there's just so many variables in the plant, and then people's individual reactions and their experiences. And, you know, as you were talking, Madeline, it also brought to mind that with different laws in every state and the different setups. So even states that have legalized cannabis for adult use, how that happens or how that's sold in that state looks very different. So have you all heard of or seen anybody, like, as they're traveling in state to state, and neither of you were from Missouri, but now you're in Missouri and you were in all kinds of other places before this. Is there any confusion or questions, or do people, or assumptions, I guess, that might even be made about when people go state to state, how things are going to happen? Or do people just figure it out?
I think so. I mean, in Idaho, it's not legal.
Okay.
It's going to take time for it to be legal in Idaho, I think. But people will just drive across the border of whatever state they need to get weed. So I think that's what comes to mind with that question. Is like, I think people are willing to drive, get the weed, and then bring it back to the state, even if it's illegal. Yeah.
I don't know. I think, because I grew up in New Jersey, too, where it's now legal. And I didn't really hear, like, that much. I don't live there now, and I haven't lived there since it's been legal. So I'm not really sure, like, what the perceptions are like when you're there. I mean, I go back, and nobody in my life really uses it, so it's not that big of a topic of conversation. But then when I get in Austin, there, I think a lot of people use it, and it's very common, but it's not legal. And so it's kind of this, it's interesting to see how it plays out in terms of the usage in those places and where it's legal. But that may also just be the people that I'm surrounded by when I'm in those places. Right. So I don't really know if that answers the question at all, but
I guess I don't think people, or I've never witnessed someone, like, crossing a state border and being like, oh, I need to check their weed laws. Like, I don't think people are like, oh, I need to check and make sure this is legal here. Like, people know where they can buy weed, and they know which states and where to go for it. But then I think, like, if you're on a road trip or, like, you travel, like, that
magic state line isn't changing anyone's behavior.
No, like, no one's checking in, like, oh, well, where is it legal here? What's this? Blah, blah, blah. They're not checking that. It's more of like, okay, where can I get it? Because I think it's rare, at least for people that I've talked with, to get in trouble. I mean, if you're smart about it, like, you can smoke and not be discovered in a state where it's not legal.
Right.
Like,
right. People have been using it even before legalization.
Right, before we legalize. It's like not a hard thing to, like, get away with. So I don't think it's a common thing for people to be, like, super concerned about the laws. Which maybe we should be more, like...
Right. Or, and I was also thinking about, again, the discrepancy in law between the federal status and state status, and, you all are, and your peers are at times when you're going to be launching careers in the very near future, and, that can be tricky, too, because at a federal level, it is still not legal, and there's still drug-free workplaces, and if, companies or organizations have federal contracts or do federal work, they have the right to drug test employees, and they cannot have cannabis in their system. So that's where, a lot of these conversation in the weeds, like, it's so nuanced. And again, I think, Sam, your point, like, or Madeline, I think you said too, that, like, people just don't know, or if they even have any awareness of it, like, aren't even really sure how to process all this information.
One thing in college that I'm remembering, it was college in Washington State where it was legal, so you could buy weed anywhere, but on campus, we were a dry campus. So you weren't supposed to drink, you weren't supposed to smoke weed on campus. And one of my friends loved weed, and all she had to do was walk out of her dorm and just be on the sidewalk, and she could smoke.
She was off campus.
Yeah, she's off campus, so she can't get in trouble. So you would see kids just smoking right on the corner, like right outside of their dorm. I'm like, that's horrible. It's cold outside. There's ice and snow everywhere, and, like, you have to step outside. Like, which I think it's a good policy by the university, just as a public health person. Like, I like that rule for a campus, just to kind of help set some kind of health guideline for youth. But I just thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, but again, it still didn't really change their behavior much.
No, and she even, like, so Spokane, Washington is kind of like St. Louis, where, like, it's just cold and icy for so long. And so she got to the point where she didn't even want to step outside of her dorm. And so she would still smoke in her apartment and got in trouble. Because, I mean, it smells and, like, the RAs and people could tell.
Knew,
and I'm like, dude, all you had to do, step outside of your dorm. But, like, yeah.
Yeah.
So interesting.
Fascinating. Sam, you mentioned you were a middle school student, or not middle school student. Well, you were a middle school student at some point, but then you were also a middle school teacher.
Yeah.
So how was that experience? What was eye-opening about seeing, you know, kind of that next generation and their reaction and opinions around cannabis?
Yeah. So I taught in Aurora, Colorado, which is neighboring to Denver. High population of Hispanic students. It was a Title I school, so most of them really low-income families. And it was shocking. It was just shocking, the prevalence of weed use and e-cigarette use. Like, they were 8th graders that I was teaching, but it was a middle school, so, like, there were 6th and 7th graders too who were involved. And just numerous, like, I don't have a percentage or a number in mind, but, like, so many children who were getting in trouble for bringing products to school. And it was often the case that they would go into the bathroom and, like, ask, like, hey, can I go to the bathroom? And then they'd go into the bathroom and be smoking in the bathroom. And we would find stashes of, like, vapes and weed products in the bathroom. They would even, like, break open, like, the toilet paper holder and, like, hide products in there. Or, like, meet before class or meet before school and smoke, like, outside of campus, just right off the edge. Yeah. And they're 12. One story that, this wasn't weed, but it was a vape. I was teaching science, and this kid is in the back row of my class. And this kid was great. Loved him. Super, super great kid. But he starts, like, setting up this, like, book tower on his desk. Like, opens up a book in front of him, opens up a book, sets it on top. And I'm like, what is he doing? And I'm teaching, like, and there's a class of 30, so I can't really, like, he's not doing anything wrong. It's just an odd behavior to be setting up a book tower. And then I, like, ask a question and call on him because I want him to engage and maybe look away from his book tower.
Yeah.
And right as I'm calling on him, this cloud of vape, like
vapor,
vapor comes out of the books, and I'm like, oh my gosh. And that's right when I called on him. And so he, like, coughed into his book tower and then, like, wasn't able to answer the question, so I called on someone else. And then I was like, all right, guys, we're going to take a quick break, and then walked back to him. And it was 2 students that were sharing a vape in my science class.
Just in the back of the class?
Just in the back. And I'm like...
And I thought the book tower was going to...
You think that's going to hide it?
Hold it all? Right.
So I guess, to answer your question, the prevalence was way greater than I was expecting. And it's worrisome because, I mean, even 6th graders were doing it and talking about it. Yeah, which for me, I went to a private school, so, like, middle school, there was nothing like that. But yeah, I just think it's happening way earlier.
Fascinating. Yeah. You know, and that's again a lot of the work that we do, and just trying to help educate. And a lot of times, you know, people say, well, how young should you start? And to Prevent Ed, I mean, the younger the better, right? To just start having these conversations, start instilling some of these resiliency skills and knowledge for young people, because I just think sometimes they don't know the risks and consequences, or, you know, even if they just had more process time and information about it, it might be helpful. But yeah, I think that middle school is a tricky time already, and I can only imagine when you bring in all the substances and all the other things that are happening, it doesn't help at all.
We had one quick more story. We had a field trip for the 8th graders, and I forget where we went for the field trip, but we came back at the end of the day, and I think the students thought we were going to leave right away after the field trip, but we had, like, one more assembly in the gym, and there were literally, like, 15 8th graders that were so high, couldn't even keep their eyes open, were, like, falling asleep on the table. And it's a whole school assembly. We're all sitting in the cafeteria, and they actually can't. One of the boys, like, could not stay awake.
Yeah.
And we called all of their parents, like, tried to bring in, you know, some kind of parental guidance, but at least with that population of students, parents weren't super involved. So it kind of fell on the teachers more to, like, have those conversations, which we did, but, I mean...
But when they're not reinforced, and yeah, you have to have a whole circle of support there. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Madeline, do you have any thoughts, or, I know that you haven't taught, but, I know you've worked in other nonprofits and with other populations. Is there any other kind of prevalence or kind of, again, just attitudes or beliefs around cannabis that you've seen in some of the other environments you've been into?
Well, when Sam was talking about 8th grade, I was thinking a lot about, like, my experience in middle school. And I wouldn't say it was, like, extremely prevalent in my middle school, but just a lack of knowledge. And, like, I personally was just fearful. And I think, like, having more information and, like, knowledge around these topics, I wouldn't have entered high school just, like, so scared of what I was going to experience, but been just more informed and been able to make decisions more informed because I wasn't just, like, plagued with fear over what I was going to witness. But other populations, I'm not sure. I've worked a lot with, like, homelessness populations, and so there I didn't necessarily experience so much weed. It was a lot of, like, other drugs that we were encountering, which, again, just, like, kind of a lack of information, or even in those spaces, like, what I should do about it. I think it wasn't until, like, my senior year of college when I probably, as a social work student, probably should have been way more informed about Narcan and naloxone and how to use it and what resources were available for the people we were interacting with. So, yeah, I kind of just wish I had more knowledge and had been more informed about what to do in those situations.
Absolutely. And I think that is why we continue to launch campaigns like In the Weeds and host episodes of The Preventable to really unpack some of these conversations and make sure that we are promoting that people get that information. So we know that happens in schools, it happens in communities, and the work of Prevent+Ed, although we've been doing it for 60 years, we know that it doesn't stop, and there's always more opportunities. So thank you, Madeline and Sam, for joining us today to talk on The Preventable. Thank you to all of our listeners. If you're enjoying what you've heard and you'd like to hear more, please subscribe and continue to listen on all your favorite podcast streaming locations. Can't wait to see you for the next episode. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us at The Preventable, brought to you ad-free by Prevent+Ed. Prevent+Ed works to reduce or prevent the harms of alcohol and other drug use through education, intervention, and advocacy. Please visit their website at prevented.org. Like what you heard? Rate, review, and subscribe to stay up to date with what we are serving on The Preventable.